So, in the case of the Jewish world, we know that in Judaism they have not accepted Jesus, so they have always been waiting for a Messiah. And this return for us Christians of Jesus, for them is instead a first time. So they are still expecting somebody who develops these messianic characteristics. Now, when Shabbatai Zev in the 17th century came along, they embraced him until 1666, the year in which the Sultan, the guy who was heading the Ottoman Empire, forced him to convert to Islam. So he lost his faith with most of his followers, but not all of them, because in the meantime, they went underground and they became crypto Jews, embracing Islam outwards and continuing their deviant, perverse practices in secret. And they became known as the Domme. So the Domme is initially, we can say, very much integrated within the Ottoman world. The Rothschilds, they were part of the elite at that point of the British Empire. They had married into the aristocratic families of England, just like Frank's. Under Jacob Frank advice, we saw that they started to merge with the Christian elite, no? And they did initially that in places like Vienna, for example, where we have people like Solomon de Rothschild and others who start to be, these people get nobilitated. And then the same thing happens also in the Anglican world, in the Church of England world, when they go to England. At the time of Queen Victoria, they become extremely influential, the Rothschild also there. So they are nobilitated. And the thing is that because they're Sabbatian Frankists, they don't really care about marrying Christians or marrying outside of the Jewish faith or doing things that are not really deemed Jewish or under the Mosaic laws. So the fact that you have Zionism is a product of their infiltration of the whole system and ultimately the idea that they had to punish those Jews who will not follow the directives. Let's say this, they always had the roots deep into DC. Trump thought that for a moment he could expose Epstein without exposing the rest of the people behind him. But you have to understand that the people who actually were arrested, like I explained in the introduction of this book, were Jeffrey Epstein, Jean-Luc Brunel, both suicided
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the
yeah.
prison, and then Ghislaine Maxwell, who is now treated like some kind of royal because, she has kept her mouth shut on certain things. In my book, we have a monster that was created by them, and that, of course, now they want to bury as quick as possible, because by burying him, they can continue they can continue, and that is not what we want.
No.
And then to actually see Zoran Mandani being promoted by, like I explained in my latest articles, go and check them out on leozagami.com. He was supported by progressive rabbis, women rabbis, transgender rabbis. He was supported by part of the Hasidic community, and people are, how comes they are supporting him? Well, read my book and you will understand why these people have all been infiltrated and why basically, the Sabbatian Frankists, let's not forget, the Sabbatians became outwards Muslims, and they created a lot of powerful links. It was because of the domain, was because of the Sabbatians and then the Sabbatian Frankists that the lodges of Freemasonry brought down the Ottoman Empire, but then they brought up all the various realities that we see today in the Middle East. And they have connection with all the various sects of Sufis, of secret societies within the Muslim world. Sabbatian Frankists really believed they were an elite within Judaism. And whoever didn't embrace that elite belief was somebody they could send to the concentration camps. So Like my friend Rosambar
So they
once
were
told me.
basically sacrificing themselves to be in lockstep
Exactly.
in order with with their new cause and new movement.
But also, like explained by Rabbi Antelman, they were simply doing something that is almost like a revenge against those people from mainstream Judaism who didn't believe in them, who persecuted them within the rabbinical councils. Let's not forget that you see, why do the rabbinical circles today don't want to discuss this whole thing? Because there was a moment in which the rabbinical the community and all the various councils were actually issuing codes like the ones the Inquisition will do in the Christian world, no? And what they would say, why are you following Sabbatian Frankism? Because Sabbatian Frankism was about wife swapping, sexual magic, putting in a room a bunch of ladies and giving them each one a Kabbalistic value, interpreting the Lurianic Kabbalah in the reverse way. It's almost like if it's, let's say, for a Christian, this might be more easy to understand. Satanists in the Judeo-Christian world, the real Satanists, when they actually do their black mass, they simply reverse the Christian prayers. By reversing them, they are embracing the devil. The same thing was done with the redemption through sin concept that was championed by Shabbatai Zevi and then by Jacob Frank.
How does this give them power to invert everything within reality, though?
Because the devil gives you a lot of power, Satan gives you a lot of power, the demons give you a lot of power. And even if the interpretations are different, of course, from us Christians, but in the end, it's demonic in nature, the whole thing.
Beyond the Forbidden.
Welcome to Beyond Forbidden. Today on the show, got a friend of the show, Leo Zagami. We're going to be talking about his newest book, which is The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, exposing Jeffrey Epstein and the most powerful Jewish sect in the world. Welcome to the show, Leo. How you been, man?
Great. Thank you for having me on. It's a great pleasure after a couple of years almost to be back with you and present a new book. In this case, I have terminated the Confession series with the last installment, which was volume 12, which I don't think we have discussed, but it is about the Jesuit order. And so it completes the whole series of confessions. And this instead is an essay in its own right dedicated to a new, completely new original view of the Epstein case, because I go and analyze rather than what we have today with, of course, 1,000 articles or maybe a bunch of books that talk about one side or the other of the Epstein case, which is very controversial, of course. And then we had also lately also Virginia Giuffre's memoir, which is an excellent read, which I suggest people should read together with this one, because it gives a direct experience of one of the victims. In fact, this book is dedicated to the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, but it gives a more historical and like I said, it's a perspective. It's like we are going really into the detail of the milieu that has created Jeffrey Epstein, because Jeffrey Epstein didn't create himself, like Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. and
Yeah.
and so there is today, I think, the wrong attitude towards this case, because it was embraced by one political party, then it was rejected almost, and now is embraced by another political party, while instead, the victims should be treated not in any sense connected to a political current or something related with politics, because this is a human case, and it's a case of great great suffering. But first of all, I want to introduce also the cover of this book, because the cover of this book in itself, it's a great artwork, which mixes, of course, the traditional Frankenstein from back in the days. It's alive. And then we have Jeffrey Epstein. And why we have this Jeffrey Epstein, who is almost like the Frankenstein monster. And at times I talk about the fact is both the main protagonist, because Dr. Frankenstein has never really given a name to his creature. But at the same time, he's also the creature that gets out of control and that starts, of course, doing a lot of damage. I think that it's important to understand that the whole Frankenstein novel by Mary Shelley was inspired not only by an alchemist living in a castle called Frankenstein, but also by Jacob Frank. And this book is based on the Sabbatian Frankist heresy, which is an heresy that has not really been discussed outside of Jewish circles so much, for the obvious problem that the rabbinical circles have of covering their own, legacy, but because it kind of goes and spoils this perfection they claim to have. And no matter which rabbinical school, in my analysis, we see that they are all compromised, even those Orthodox ones that were born as a reaction to the Sabbatian Frankist heresy in those areas affected by the Sabbatian Frankist heresy, which started with Shabbatai Zevi in the Ottoman Empire, but later migrated towards Eastern Europe, the areas where we have today Western Ukraine, parts of Moldova, Poland, Hungary, and then it went all the way to Austria. Why is so important, this heresy? Because great banking families like the Rothschilds were part of it, and many other protagonists of the so-called banking cartel that rules our lives today. So when we superficially are accusing all the Jews of being Zionists without really knowing the history of Zionism, or without really knowing the history of Judaism, I give a perspective which is not about criticizing a whole race, because that's racism. Instead, I'm criticizing a sect, a deviant sect, that has become very powerful, that initially was a movement which was embraced by more than half of the living Jewish people in the world at one point. Then
you have elites. You have elites in all walks of life. It doesn't matter what country it is. You're going to have different elites and different sects throughout the world.
Let's say that when you have religions, you always have a sectarian reality. Then you have a more or less influential one. I have discussed for a long time, as you know, the Catholic Church, the Jesuits, the Opus Dei, those sects within the Catholic Church, those knighthoods that are used mostly in a way that is far from really being a Christian as possible, because in reality it's all about power structures, about influence, about privileges. So in the case of the Jewish world, we know that in Judaism they have not accepted Jesus, so they have always been waiting for a Messiah. And this return for us Christians of Jesus, for them is instead a first time. So they are still expecting somebody who develops these messianic characteristics. Now, when Shabbatai Zev in the 17th century came along, they embraced him until 1666, the year in which the Sultan, the guy who was heading the Ottoman Empire, forced him to convert to Islam. So he lost his faith with most of his followers, but not all of them, because in the meantime, they went underground and they became crypto-Jews, embracing Islam outwards and continuing their deviant, perverse practices in secret, and they became known as the Domme. So the Domme is a initially, we can say, very much integrated within the Ottoman world. When Jacob Frank, though, came along 100 years after the birth of Shabbatai Zevi, claiming he was the reincarnation, things got a little bit more complicated, let's say, because Jacob Frank added an ulterior layer of
he made some of his, I guess, the Jews believe that not all, but a few within this the Jewish people believe that he was the Messiah, correct?
Well, Shabbatai Zevi already had done that. Then there had been after him a guy called Baruch Russo. The epicenter at that point, once most of the Jewish world rejected him when he embraced Islam, they became a sect known as the Dommeh. They became more sectarian in nature. At that point, they came out of mainstream Judaism. However, they were still claiming that Shabbatai Zevi was the real Messiah, and then Baruch Russo, that came immediately after him, claimed he was the reincarnation, because in certain branches of Judaism, they believe in reincarnation. So what happened with Jacob Frank, who was born 100 years after Shabbatai Zevi in 1726, is a anomaly, because he didn't want to really become only the completion of this trinity of Messiah within the Dommeh Ottoman Empire community of crypto-Jews who were mainly based in Thessaloniki, which is Salonika, which is a very important area, and at the time was part of Greece. After the Ottoman Empire crumbled, then they would, let's say that most of these domain of these important and influential Jews that really made a legacy also in the banking system, because Thessaloniki was in a strategic point. Now today it's called Thessaloniki, it used to be called Salonika, but it is strategic because it is almost like, you can go from then Turkey into there, and then of course you can then use it as a port of entry for then going towards Eastern Europe and many other countries that at the time, of course, were having many people embracing this heresy. Jacob Frank, like I explained in my book, goes to Thessaloniki because his family is a family of Sabbatians. He eventually gets recognized as the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi, but at that point he doesn't accept simply to be the Messiah of the Dommeh, of the crypto-Jews. He wants to be the Messiah of all Jews, and he wants to go back to where he came from. He came originally from Ukraine and parts of Poland. So he goes back there, and there he manages to convince 20,000 Jews to convert to the Catholic faith. That is something that happened in a period of time in which the Jews that were living there were very much in contact also with the Jesuits, because the Jesuits were very influential in those areas. And they were, at that point, they had been kicked out also of the Catholic Church. But just to cut a long story short, because of course you have the whole book to read, I start this book with, first of all, a take on modern Israel and why modern Israel is in particularly influenced by this Sabbatian Frankist cult. The very birth of Israel was. And at the time, of course, we had Theodor Herzl, who founded the Zionist movement. He even wrote a novel which cites Shabbatai Zevi, and this novel became influential because it actually influenced the name of Tel Aviv, that, as you know, was the first capital of Israel. So there is an enormous influence. At the same time, what happened, though, was that Jacob Frank's sect became very influential within Catholic circles, because they converted in a way, but they converted in a very insidious way, because when they converted, Jacob Frank initially wanted them to marry only between each other, even after they became Catholic, but because they were under the eyes of the Inquisition, the eyes of the rabbinical councils, and he decided to merge with the Catholic world. And what better way than marrying into the best families of the Catholic world, the aristocrats, the nobles, even the royals. And at that point, what happens is that he instructs his followers and finds an escamotage, which is very diabolic. When one of them will convert from Judaism into the Catholic faith, they will embrace the surname of their godfather. That meant embracing the surname of very powerful families, because they usually choose not the common folk, but rather some eminent figure of the community. This happened in particular, like I said, in Eastern Europe, in Poland in particular, also parts of Ukraine. Today in Ukraine, we have Volodymyr Zelensky, which is a typical product of Sabbatian Frankist. He's a guy who we can define as maybe the product of secular Judaism, but secular Judaism is the product of the Sabbatian Frankists, because they became very much involved with secret societies, with the Illuminati. They entered a secret society called the Asiatic Brethren, and with them, they conquered Frankfurt, which became the home for the Rothschilds and many other banking families that welcomed Jacob Frank like he was a god on earth. So the fact that they started to have this very strong relationship with, with the Catholic world, even merging in secret elements of the Sabbatian Frankist cult with the Illuminati, it was something that then also provoked reactions, and they got involved in what is known as Jewish Enlightenment. They got involved even in the French Revolution. One of the biggest representatives, known as Moses Dobruska, whose mother was cousin of Jacob Frank, and eventually would suffer the fate of many others in the revolution because he died with the guillotine. But he was very influential on the philosophie sociale of the French Revolution. So here we have Jews who for the first time, thanks to the Sabbatian Frankists, were let into the Masonic lodges. And these Masonic lodges became very influential. The system known as the Asiatic Brethren in Germany was very influential and connected, like I said, with the Illuminati and with all those banking families that, of course, are today known to the common folk, who maybe refers to, for example, the Rothschild, but there is many others that maybe people don't know about. So my book goes into the details of all the various families that eventually will create an elite group in the early 1990s called the Mega Group, headed by Lex Wexner, that was backing Jeffrey Epstein from the very early stage of his career. But he wasn't even the first guy from the Sabbatian Frankists to embrace Jeffrey Epstein. It was Donald Barr, the father of William Barr, who in the middle of the 70s gave Epstein his first job without any credentials. He made him teach maths and science in one of the most preppy schools, the Dalton School in New York. Then, of course, he started from there his career. Then they rigged a whole building in New York with cameras and everything, and they said, work for us. But on the contrary of what many other researchers claim, and at times they claim things, but they can never really go in depth, because when they find themselves in front of Epstein, there is many limits. One of the limits is the access, being able to access this information from the intelligence community, for example, who worked with him, or the elite like Prince Andrew and many others. There is several members of the Rothschild families in the black books. I have analyzed the 2 black books of Jeffrey Epstein in my book, and I point out on the various connections with all the old families, including those families of the black nobility which were connected to the Vatican, which merged with the Sabbatian Frankists. Today, the Sabbatian Frankists are very powerful, even here in the United States. Stellantis, which owns Chrysler, which owns Ferrari, which owns Fiat, is in the hands of the Elkann family and John Elkann, who is himself a Sabbatian Frankist, and his family has a long history that goes all the way back to Frankfurt. So and also to Worms, which is another important place because that's where the magic of Abramelin the Mage was devised, the text that inspired Aleister Crowley. In this book, I show with receipts. I mean, at the end of the book, you can find pages and pages of citations from credible sources, which are academic.
I saw that. I had the Kindle version. I don't have the physical copy yet because I usually for note taking, it's easy for me to do the Kindle version, and then I'll get the physical copy also. But if I can cut in for just a moment.
Sure, absolutely. I would like you to...
well, there's so many different avenues I want to go. And you laid out a really good groundwork. You always do. You're well polished with these podcasts and these interviews. You know how to lay out the groundwork, get everybody informed, lay out a good synopsis of the book. You do a really good job with that. Was it I don't know if you knew this was going to happen, or just a coincidence, but number one on Netflix movies right now. Number one on Netflix. It got released, I think, Friday. Frankenstein, the new adaptation, Frankenstein. And then your book just came out, the October 27th or 26th or something like that. You know,
great synchronicity.
What's the coincidence, right? But secondly, man, there's so many. Where do I want to go? So with the Sabbatian Frankists, they have ties with the Rothschilds. Do you first off, I guess this a couple part question. Do the Rothschilds, do they use certain Zionist or Jewish elites as a soldier, I guess, a foot soldier in the world economy and all that? Secondly,
it's a little bit more complex. Say that it's a history that I described in the last chapter of this book, goes back 100 years to when the Puritans and the Marranos merged together their ideals at the time of Oliver Cromwell, who beheaded the king and took power in England. They let the Jews back into England after hundreds of years. They had been casted out, but the idea was to let them back to England as a first kind of, back to England temporarily, to then send them back to Israel. And that was the beginning of the roots of Zionism. It wasn't called yet Zionism. The term Zionism will come in the 19th century, but it was very much then also in the 19th century, British Freemasonry together with the Anglican Church, which encouraged very much the Jews to put together this concept of Zionism. So the Rothschilds, they were part of the elite at that point of the British Empire. They had married into the aristocratic families of England, just like under Jacob Frank's advice, we saw that they started to merge with the Christian elite, no? And they did initially that in places like Vienna, for example, where we have people like Solomon de Rothschild and others who started to be, these people get nobilitated. And then the same thing happens also in the Anglican world, in the Church of England world, when they go to England. At the time of Queen Victoria, they become extremely influential, the Rothschild also there. So they are nobilitated. And the thing is that because they're Sabbatian Frankists, they don't really care about marrying Christians or marrying outside of the Jewish faith or doing things that are not really deemed Jewish or under the Mosaic laws. So the fact that you have Zionism is a product of their infiltration of the whole system, and ultimately the idea that they had to punish those Jews who will not follow the directives. And in fact, in this book, there is also the biggest controversy when you talk about the transfer agreement between the Nazis and the Zionists in 1933. We talk about the fact that almost 3/4 of the Jews in the 1920s still didn't want to go to Israel. They were forced by the Sabbatian Frankists, who, at the end of the day,
It's also called the Havana something.
Yes, that is the actual name. But you see, all this brings us to today. Today, in my book, means the influence that all this has on Jeffrey Epstein. No? So who are these people who then created Jeffrey Epstein? And like I said, there were people like, for example, Donald Barr wasn't a Catholic until late in his life, just like many Sabbatian Frankists. But then Les Wexner, and then you have a lot of other people, trust me, from Ronald Lauder to Lester Crown to Edgar Bronfman, and all these people are really influential. I mean, when I say influential, I say people like the CEO of CBS, most advisors of the White House in the last few decades. These are really powerful people.
Is that why Trump is so afraid to go down that avenue? You know what I mean? Because I forgot the woman's name. I have it somewhere saved, in my notes somewhere. The woman who helped her late husband, and she's really tied in with Israel. I think she was his biggest donor in the last election. Ties with Israel also. But he has a lot of ties with Israel, and it seems like whenever they say jump, it's almost like he asked how high, and he was all for trying to expose Jeffrey Epstein in his first election, but something switched over the years. I don't know what happened. Did they get their roots deeper into DC and maybe into Trump?
No, they let's say this, they always had the roots deep into DC. Trump thought that for a moment he could expose Epstein without exposing the rest of the people behind him. But you have to understand that the people who actually were arrested, like I explained in the introduction of this book, were Jeffrey Epstein, Jean-Luc Brunel, both suicided in the prison, and then Ghislaine Maxwell, who's now treated like some kind of royal because, she has kept her mouth shut on certain things, and she's regarded like also an asset within the Sabbatian Frankist world. I explained that her connection with the Shekinah, her connection with what Jeffrey Epstein was practicing, because Jeffrey Epstein was not simply a pedophile, but a representative of a cult that also uses pedophile for their own nefarious activities. And those activities are not only blackmailing, but there is much more to it. And so, when you have people like Ehud Barak, when you have people like many others who went to visit him in Little St. James, in the last few years of his life, he even bought another island next to it, a bigger one. He was like given these assets so he could work. But on the contrary, what most people think is like Jeffrey Epstein was working for the Mossad. Jeffrey Epstein was working for the Shin Bet. Jeffrey Epstein was working for MI6. Jeffrey Epstein was working for the FBI. No, it was the CIA, the FBI, the MI6, Mossad, Shin Bet, and all these other intelligence agencies who worked for the Sabbatian Frankists. It's another kind of twist to the story here.
So it's almost like he was just a part of the same organization. It's not like he was solely or they were just working with him solely.
The aspiring leader of that organization in charge of this operation, but at the same time, he also started to, and that's why then we go back to the Frankenstein tale, because the Frankenstein tale is a tale based also on the golem folklore tale, very popular in Judaism, and it's about in the case of the golem, it's about a rabbi who wants to create something to defend the Jewish community, but in the end it goes rogue, and the same happens with Jeffrey Epstein, because Jeffrey Epstein was protected until they could not protect him any longer. And Trump thought he could actually, because of what happened in 2019, maybe get away with exposing Jeffrey Epstein to his electorate. And we all believed, that he would do that to the fullest extent. It was promised by people like Dan Bongino a long time before he got into office. He was doing podcasts on it almost every week. And the same with other peoples like Kash Patel. But once you go into the Oval Office, you are no longer the person you were outside of the Oval Office. And suddenly, these people who own the system, basically, they are there knocking at your door saying, with Epstein, there is a level that we don't want to touch. And it's very, of course, for me, and I think for many people who are watching us, it was a moment of great disappointment to see Trump kind of diminishing the whole thing by calling it a hoax.
And he was making fun of a post back this past summer, July or August. He made a post on his not X, but it was True Social. Basically all the people in the alternative world and a lot of people that got him elected the past couple of times called the ones that were looking into all that. Basically, I forgot what he said.
Yeah, he himself.
We're basically idiots that are chasing our tails,
and that really was the moment in which I was inspired more than ever to finish this book, because I understood the relevance of it. I was already working on it for.
You know what post I'm talking about, right? It was this past
yes,
summer.
I remember.
It was a long post. It was basically.
I don't remember the exact definition he gave of the people who were, chasing the Epstein case, and in a way he was just calling them, like you said, idiots. No, I don't.
And he's done with those people or something. I'm like, what? Yes. What the hell? Like,
but that is really something that disappointed many people, who I think way too quick now tend to forget things. Like you remember, but many people forget. Okay. Now that is why in the introduction, when I opened this book, I state, are we still talking about Jeffrey? It was like I cite Trump and he says, are we still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? Are we still talking about it? Yes, we are. And there is a reason why we are talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Because if we don't talk about Jeffrey Epstein, we can't understand what is really going on in Washington. And why every time we send a politician of whatever faction to Washington, he simply gets spoiled by the lobbies who are very much present there and becomes like everybody else, corrupt to the core. It's almost like, there is no way of making it, of straightening up this system. In a way, I believed in 2015 when Alex Jones came to Rome to visit me, and we produced a documentary on the Vatican. He asked me, should I support Trump? Should I not support Trump? Should we support Trump together? And I said, it's great to have a billionaire who wants to enter politics, because it will be a little bit more difficult to corrupt him. The moment in which, though, you start becoming greedy, it's a dangerous path, no? That can lead to really losing all that ethic and moral superiority which you had for a long time. So I was very disappointed. Many other people were disappointed. But this book is not really much. There is not really much about Trump. I probably have cited him 3 times in the whole book. I cite him. I discuss what was said by one of the witnesses about him, but there was never really anything criminal that Trump was said to be involved. The problem is the people around him, the people that are so influential, like the one you cited earlier, no? The people that maybe are in a way involved with financing, with backing him financially and all the rest. That is a different thing, because you have, so many people like Ronald Lauder, who was part of the mega group with Les Wexner, he's a former member of the Reagan administration. He's a longtime donor to Israeli Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party, as well as a longtime friend of both Donald Trump and Roy Cohn, who was his mentor. So I would say this. There is no swamp that has been drained because, unfortunately, the Sabbatian Frankist Jesuit legacy stands firm on top of the pyramid and rules both sides and just plays with them, and gets to have a little bit of theater. The theater in the age of social networks got wild. The incompetence that people like Joe Biden showed, though, and the criminal act of letting millions of people, that is is really the only thing why I still support at least Trump's migration as being the best he has done up until now in his second term. Because, as somebody who has been naturalized since the last time we talked, I became American, and I went through the whole process of it for years. I was married with my wife 10 years, and I was working for American companies, publishers for also 10 years before I eventually managed to become American. And to see millions of people just coming into this country legally and acting like, everybody should shut up and stand by this scam. Well, I think that for that reason, I love the work that Tom Homan and Trump have done in this regards. But having said that,
I found it here. Here's just off an article. I've had more success in 6 months than perhaps any president of our country's history, and all of these people want to talk about with strong prodding by the fake news and the success-starved Dems is the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Let these weaklings continue forward and do the Democrats' work. Don't even think about talking of our incredible and unprecedented success because I don't want their support anymore. And their new scam is what we will forever call the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And my past supporters have bought into this bullshit. Hook, line, and sinker.
No, it's not bullshit. And it's actually something that gave me actually the inspiration to pursue the whole thing further. And so that's why, like I said, in the introduction, I say, I actually cite Trump when he says, are we still talking about Epstein? Yes, we are, and there is a reason why we are. But also I explain one thing, though. Bear with me a second. I explain, right from the introduction, two things that are very important. One is, okay, once you read this book, you understand the whole system is compromised. So what is the solution? If we adopt the revolutionary solution, we will no longer have a government. We will no longer have the United States of America. We will basically fall trap to our enemies, China and Russia, who will love for our country to become weak. So I explain why, at the end of the day, we will never have the full disclosure of the Epstein case or the Epstein files, whatever they are. For a sense of responsibility towards our country as an American, I wanted to stress that out at the very beginning of the book. That you might be upset by what you read. It might change forever your whole view. I mean, at the end of this book, you might just want to say, well, we are, this system is rigged. There's nothing else I can do. But the fact is, at least we are aware of it. At least we are aware of it. And we no longer get thrown from one side to the other in an eternal game of politics, which is simply theater.
Yes,
Theater,
I agree.
theater. So that's it, really. And then another point that is very important that I made in this book, both at the beginning but also on the back cover when you read the actual synopsis or a brief description of it. This is not about anti-Semitism. This is actually being respectful of the Jewish people, the Jewish religion. I actually explain all the fake news of the Khazarians and all that BS. I explain how there has been a lot of misunderstandings around that, how the Ashkenazi actually, they're not really that diabolic, because they were the first ones to actually fight Jacob Frank's heresy or the Sabbatian heresy even before Jacob Frank came into the fold. So it's not about, like I said, a race. It's about understanding how that race became victim of a sect. It would be like me stating that because the Italians have the Vatican there, all the Italians are criminals or all Italians are corrupt. The Italians, unfortunately, are victims of a little state with 900 people at the center of Rome, which rules the whole country and rules all the mafias of Italy. But it's not their fault. They are the victims, just like the Israeli people are the victims. So my book also has a lot of respect towards Judaism and shows all the various aspects of it by citing sources which are primarily Jewish. So you cannot then come to me and say, oh, you said that Israel is a Sabbatian state. No, I didn't say. I cite my late friend Barry Kamish, who was also somebody who fought for the IDF, who said that Israel was a Sabbatian state. You are saying that Henry Kissinger was a Sabbatian Frankist and that this and this other guy were Sabbatian. Yes, I cite. You say that Adolf Hitler was the product of a Sabbatian Frankist ritual. Yes, I cite Rabbi Unterman. Or I cite Gershon Scholem. Or I cite people within the academic Jewish milieu, the few people who had the courage to discuss these subjects. Because you have to understand, like I stated at the beginning, there is a lot of Jewish rabbis who would like all this that I have denounced in this book to simply disappear under the table. So then they can go in front of Zoran Mandani dressed up with their fancy hat and their thing and say, oh, Mandani, maybe you are Jewish too. We should look into that and all that. When I explain already in volume 10 of my Confessions, as you know, that the Shia religion was created itself with the support of a Jewish guy who was a member of the Erev Rav, because, like I explain in this book about Epstein, it goes back even further than the Sabbatian Frankists. It goes all the way back to those how are we going to call them, witch doctors or magicians in the house of the Pharaoh, who were not Jews, but when they saw the kind of power that Moses had, they decided to follow him. They were not only Jews who followed Moses. This is historical. This is part of at least what is relayed also in the Jewish holy text. There was a group of people called the Erev Rav. And the Erev Rav compromised Moses from the very beginning when he went up the mountain by getting the Jews to worship the golden calf. So it's right from the golden calf that this problem starts, and then goes back. But like I stated in what is really my book, we have a monster that was created by them, and that, of course, now they want to bury as quick as possible, because by burying him, they can continue. They can continue, and that is not what we want.
No,
that's what not. So I mean, it's not been easy to write this book. I had Jewish people that come to me and say, "Well, you can't ascribe all the deviant phases of the Jewish religion only to the Sabbatian Frankists." But then I explain to them, I have the evidence. I have the sources. I'm stating that if today here in America you have as the number one Jewish current, let's say religious current, Reform Judaism, There is a reason. Reform Judaism, progressive Judaism, liberal, if there is a bunch of progressive rabbis who even nominate transgender rabbis, women rabbis, things that are completely against the Mosaic law, which is not only the Ten Commandments, it's 613 precepts that need to be respected. And so to one guy I said, for me, if you don't respect these precepts, you are no longer respectful of your own religion. And so I'm not going to no longer respect you or your rabbinical school. You're compromised. And it's not only the progressive liberal Jews that are born out of what I describe in the book, as I know, I think you have already read a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Jewish Enlightenment, which the Sabbatian Frankists helped build, is something that then not only secularized the Jewish faith, but ultimately also gave us products like Karl Marx and communism. Communism might have initially been experimented by the Jesuits, but it kind of took on a whole new level when people like Karl Marx started to develop the Manifesto, started to develop those texts, which in a way are completely coherent with his Sabbatian Frankist background, but they're not coherent with a traditional Jewish background. Why do we have people like Woody Allen, who used to go often and visit Jeffrey Epstein? Why do we have people like Woody Allen who are so distant from the Jewish faith? Why do we have people like Bernie Sanders who are so distant from the Jewish faith? Because the Jewish faith has been led astray. And in this book, I demonstrate with the receipts why, at the end of the day, also Israel in itself, the country, and the people who live there, it can't be completely condemned because, unfortunately, those people are victims, just like Italians are victims of the Vatican. The people in Israel are victims of the Jewish Sabbatian Frankist elite. That this, in this book, I demonstrated that at the beginning of the 20th century, when the Zionist movement was created, the Sabbatian Frankists created the two opposites. On one side, they created with this guy here a branch of Judaism, which becomes then this is the Zionist revisionist movement, which then today is represented by the Likud party of Benjamin Netanyahu. On the other, you have the Jews who followed the Moses S., who, by the way, introduced Karl Marx to communism and its values, who instead founded what is known as labor Zionism, which Jeffrey Epstein was very much a supporter of because he was a supporter of Ehud Barak, who then who he even continued to have a relationship after he was condemned and visited the island many, many times. These people are, of course, connected with the Mossad, but they are connected also with everything else. I mean, the Mossad, they have, the Mossad used the mega group that became like the Illuminati of the B'nai Brit. And the B'nai Brit, which I described in this book, is a very important organization, as you know.
If I can cut in, what I've heard you say that they created Jeffrey Epstein several times.
Yes.
I agree. But what is the main reason for creating a Jeffrey Epstein figure? And I'm sure there's other figures out there in the world today lurking in the shadows. Is because they used him.
Today, I think that.
Well, if you let me continue just for a second, for a second, like if they created him to human trafficking, child trafficking, and all that, was one of the main ploys for that to get dirt on certain politicians, and then they have leverage. Is that it?
It's not only that. There is much more, because at the end of the day, if that was the case, we would not have only had Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and Jean-Luc Brunel under the lens of justice. We will have many other people.
Agree with that. And something else I was wanting to tell you also, I think another reason why they're afraid to go into the black book and dig more into this is because I can't prove it. And maybe you can in the future, or maybe I didn't get to read the entire book, but everybody forgets about DC Madam Deborah Jean Palfrey from she was the call she ran the call girl ring in DC, and she died of suicide in 2008, and her assistant who worked for her, and she was a call girl too, but she was kind of like an assistant to DC Madam, Brittany Britton, died of suicide also in 2007. Like,
then we have
what did these females know, man? What do they know about these politicians in DC? You know, and I feel like there's a connection with the Epstein network.
Well, the connection is found here, and the connection is the fact that the Bohemian Club was actually founded by the Sabbatian Frankist in Europe. The whole system that became the system of the Bohemian Club, people don't know about the history really of the Bohemian Club, but I bring actually accurate historic information also by academic sources, which bring the actual reality of the Bohemian Club. The Bohemian Club was born out of lodges of the Asiatic Brethren, which was connected to the Sabbatian Frankist. Yes. And at the same time, I don't want to spoil too much because otherwise I was give out of the whole book, but I can tell you that by understanding that the Sabbatian Frankists, often use prostitution, often use minor. I mean, it's part of that. The fact that Nancy Pelosi's husband is one of the leading figures of the Bohemian Club. The fact that it's not really about Democrat or Republican. They always say, oh, yes, the Bohemian Club is about Republicans who go and, and then you have Bill Clinton. And then you have the... So it's not really about the political party. There's a much more sinister element to it at work. And that element is an element that, as I describe in my book, goes also into the rituals and practices and beliefs of the Sabbatian Frankists. Because without their element of transgression, we will not have the present society as we know it. Aleister Crowley, who everybody talks about, was directly connected to the Sabbatian Frankists, and I demonstrated with documents that I cite from the OTO, who say we are influenced by the Asiatic Brethren. They are the Fratres Lucis. They are the Illuminati, basically, the real current of the Illuminati. You see, Adam Weishaupt didn't really last that long, but in a way, then his disciple changed the names of the organizations that came after him. He was influential also, if we want, in the foundation of the Bohemian Club. But he also merged, their activities were merged also with the Asiatic Brethren. So, because they were, of course, they were working both in Germany, and the difference was that the lodges of the Illuminati didn't let the Jews inside their lodges, and the Asiatic Brethren let the Jews inside their lodges. And that was a big thing, because then the fact that in Germany there was so much obstructionism towards letting the Jews within the elite of Freemasonry and the Illuminati, then inspired those German Jews who came to New York in 1843 and created the B'nai Brit. The B'nai Brit is, like I explain in my book, the Freemasonry of the Jewish world. And we can say that the mega group that was then founded in 1991 by Lex Wexner wanted to become like the Illuminati of that Masonic world. So the elite of the B'nai Brit will then meet within an even closer, closed circle, an elitarian circle. I think that people need to understand that B'nai Brit is the biggest fraternal organization in the world when it comes to Jews. And in my book, I reveal the real significance of the name, which means Sabbatai is my illumination. The fact that the Sabbatian Frankists were able to disguise themselves for a very long time and, today, even the Jewish historian says the last formal document that we have of a Sabbatian Frankist is in the late 1800s in New York. Then we have, though, other figures, public figures, who talk about and demonstrated that they are aligned with the Sabbatian Frankists later on. And there is one in particular which I show in this book, which I want to show you, because this figure demonstrates how insidious they have been within the American system. You might not know this woman, Alice Godmar Brandels. Here.
I saw that in the book, but I don't know a whole lot about her. No, I've
The
heard her
husband
mentioned
was
before.
the husband was a member of the Supreme Court of the United States. And she influenced him to pass all the most progressive laws. She championed all the causes that today the liberal establishment champions. And she openly talked about Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank being her main inspiration. We also know from testimonies in the 1920s in New York, but also in Europe, up until the 1930s, up until, of course, the Holocaust, that the Sabbatian Frankists really believed they were an elite within Judaism. And whoever didn't embrace that elite belief was somebody they could send to the concentration camps. So, like my friend Rosambar,
So they were basically sacrificing themselves to be in lockstep and order with their new cause and new movement.
But also, like explained by Rabbi Anterman, they were simply doing something that is almost like a revenge against those people from mainstream Judaism who didn't believe in them, who persecuted them within the rabbinical councils. Let's not forget that you see, why do the rabbinical circles today don't want to discuss this whole thing? Because there was a moment in which the rabbinical community and all the various councils were actually issuing codes like the ones the Inquisition will do in the Christian world, no? And what they would say, why are you following Sabbatian Frankism? Because Sabbatian Frankism was about wife swapping, sexual magic, putting in a room a bunch of ladies and giving them each one a Kabbalistic value, interpreting the Lurianic Kabbalah in the reverse way. It's almost like if let's say for a Christian, this might be more easy to understand. Satanists in the Judeo-Christian world, the real Satanists, when they actually do their black mass, they simply reverse the Christian prayers. By reversing them, they are embracing the devil. The same thing was done with the redemption through sin concept that was championed by Shabbatai Zevi and then by Jacob Frank.
How does this give them power to invert everything within reality, though?
Because the devil gives you a lot of power, Satan gives you a lot of power, the demons give you a lot of power. And even if the interpretations are different, of course, from us Christians, but in the end it's demonic in nature, the whole thing. So
to turn everything good into corruption, I guess.
It's a little bit like, okay, Alistair Crowley was very much a Sabbatian Frankist in his own telema. I mean, when he went and created that Abbey of Telema in Sicily, he will practice the most perverse things, because he said that through practicing the most perverse, twisted, I'm talking about really perverse. I'm talking like, I don't know, letting his girlfriend being having sex with a goat and chopping the head of a goat when the goat was coming. I mean, stuff that is really perverse. Now, or when it comes to the Sabbatian Frankists, they will turn everything upside down. They will go and eat pork during the holy days. They will interpret the Torah in their own way, not in the way that is commonly known. We have, of course, the 5 written books, and then we have the oral Torah, but their interpretation was completely twisted. So then you end up, like I explained in my book, with King David having an homosexual encounter on top of a mountain. So, I mean, that is really some far out stuff for a Jewish person, normal Jewish person. That's why the war against Sabbatian Frankism was first of all fought within Judaism, and I explained that in my book.
I remember reading that part. Yes.
Yeah.
And if they invert everything, and also another offshoot or synonym, I guess you could say, of inversion would be hijacking also. So my thing is, if Trump and other high political figures in DC are connected in ties through whatever with some of the Sabbatian Frankists and Israeli elites.
Well, they are, because simply the B'nai Brit, which is the biggest organization, the Jewish service organization that really every Jewish person of relevance is part of. This is an order that was founded in 1843, like I said, by German Jews who felt they were neglected by mainstream Freemasonry, in their country at least. And then, in fact, but you have to understand that even here, in the reform of Albert Pike. Albert Pike was a great reformer of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. The reforms that they made within Freemasonry often were made so they could benefit the entrance of the Jews, because the Freemasonry was born as a Christian concept. I mean, it was born within a Christian mindset. So they had to do some things to adapt it at one point, even if they embraced large parts of Judaism within the Royal Arch and other elements of Freemasonry, including the first 3 degrees, which are, of course, based on the Old Testament.
Where I was trying to go with that was, if they can create and use Jeffrey Epstein, how do we know that they didn't create the MAGA movement to invert the real alternative movement?
Okay, first of all, you made a question before that I want to answer, but
okay.
Understand that we want to complete when you said basically there must be a new Jeffrey Epstein already, around the world doing the same things. Well, I would say that in the year 2025, what Jeffrey Epstein was doing could be done by an AI creation based on his mindset of perversion, where you kind of scan every single social network in search of minors and stuff and come up probably with a solution which is highly technologic. Let's not forget that Jeffrey Epstein himself was a Dr. Frankenstein of the situation. He wanted to see the whole world. He was doing experiments in the AI. He even was behind the creation of Sophia the robot. So he was also a mad scientist, not only a pervert in his own thing. And he went very rogue, and I think that was the case. But then eventually, of course, he became a liability, and that's why he was brought down. But in the case of the creation of the MAGA movement, we are in front of...
I guess the reason why I say that, because if they have the power to create and Jeffrey Epstein basically and use him,
Sure.
How do we know they don't have the power to create an inverted the real alternative movement, and they've given us a false inverted reality of the alternative movement, and they give us MAGA to make us think that that's on our side, but that's really the devil wearing cheap clothing.
Okay, first of all, I think that the MAGA movement is about making America great again, and that is a concept that then was taken to create something political out of it, but all of the Americans should want to make America great again, regardless of Trump, regardless of what the movement has become, because I think it's in the interest of each American to make America great again.
I guess I'm referring to more the part of MAGA where, because a lot of people that claim MAGA great, they're experts in conspiracy theories, and they're experts in all of it. I'm like, I feel like they've been that was hijacked and created off of the real alternative truth community. Well, you know what I mean?
I explained that.
That's kind of what I'm leading at. Like,
Yeah, sure. I explained that already in volume 7 of my Confessions, where I said like Trump became an agent of chaos in a way, of chaos magic. And at the same time, in volume 7 of my Confessions, I also explained how the QAnon phenomena was used as a psyop
I
to
remember
get
you
a lot
saying
of.
that.
Yes. So you remember, I was saying
Yeah.
it years ago. But in regards to MAGA, like I said, politically, what has happened to MAGA with Trump at the moment is that he's protecting the interests of an elite, and that is no longer the interest of the majority of Americans. So I stand very much with Marjorie Taylor Greene in what she thinks, in what she's doing, because I think that behind her there could be really a genuine political movement for the future. However, I'm also very much disappointed, and I think the problem is always the same, that once you get to that seat of power, inevitably they're going to come knocking at your door, and they're going to find some dirt on you, or they're going to say you own us this and that, and so this you can do, this other you can't do. I think that maybe Trump should have understood that we are not idiots, so we are not people that can be brought around for a ride. And for that reason, there is a lot of people who probably don't support him any longer like they used to. But this is a very disappointing also for the Republican Party, who is also probably going to lose the midterm elections because things are going in the wrong direction.
And I've also used the I guess the analogy, and I'm sure some of the people that listen to my podcast all the time, I've used it many a times, is that you can't get to about anybody that gets that type of position, really any position in DC, or within the high branches of government, technically.
I think anybody who gets in Congress or even near Congress.
But I can't even become, let's say I want to go become a general manager over several stores at McDonald's. I can't even do that without, and that's on a small microcosmic level, without lying, cheating, being a shitty person, backstabbing, manipulating. I can't be a good, honest person, a good, honest, moral, spiritual person
without the compromise.
And that's on a micro level. Think of DC. But yet we have this faith, and they are so righteous. And
okay, that is something that I also explained at the end of volume 9 in regards to the choice between the republic and the monarchy. And the problem stands when a republic is made of people. Okay, the idea in 1776 was to have really righteous people to defend their interest in Washington, D.C. And for that reason, I'm very grateful to have become American, because America has an incredible constitution and an incredible idea that is still in the making. However, the compromises that have been made in Washington from the very start, I think soon after George Washington died, and everything that came after, even Thomas Jefferson, it started to crumble, and the compromises were 1, then 2, then 3, and now we are with thousands of compromises, millions probably compromises, that have led the whole concept of a republic astray. So to choose a republic rather than a monarchy, I don't know if it's always the best choice, because a monarchy, at least you know that the house of that, for example, the monarchy in England at the moment is the House of Windsor. We know that through Prince Andrew, through King Charles with his own background, being a friend of that pedophile, and Prince Andrew with Epstein, who now is no longer even prince. The House of Windsor is compromised. But if the English people wanted, like it's happened in the past, you remove the whole dynasty and you place a new one. However, with the Republic, now it's very difficult because it's all built on money. So, first of all, if Leo Zagami wants to become a representative of Congress and I don't have to my name $100 million in my bank, I shouldn't even try. And that means that then democracy is restricted only to the people who have that kind of money. And I'm talking even Major Taylor Greene, who seems to be, but even she has money. Anybody that
or Thomas Massey. I like Thomas Massey, but I don't know if he's got a chance. So.
Anybody who doesn't have money will never have a chance when you have so much money that is poured into these elections. From the moment you go into the local state officials to the officials that then go to Washington, even more money. So exponentially is always more and more.
And then if Thomas Massey and other good people, whatever, do get money, what does that bring? They usually bring compromise.
Yes,
compromise.
Yes, because that money comes with a compromise.
Comes with a cost.
That money comes with a compromise, unfortunately. And it's at the end of the day, Leo Zagami could have accepted that compromise in the past. When money was thrown into my direction, a lot of money, without going into the detail. But by accepting it, I would have probably compromised my whole life, and I will not be able to now write these books or talk with you freely or go to bed with no problems of conscience. Thomas Massey is a guy who has demonstrated, also in regards to the Epstein case.
You wrote about him in the book a little bit also.
Yes. Definitely a lot of maturity. But the problem is that already now they want to remove him. They want to have somebody who they think is more trustable for the Republican Party, meaning somebody who is completely and utterly loyal to Trump. But in that case, we are really in front of a bad situation for all of us who have supported Trump by thinking he will never do such things, that he will maybe, support people like Thomas Massey. So it's a very sad situation for all those activists who for years, like me and others, have said Trump. I still stand by Trump when it comes, like I said, to immigration, but many other policies have simply failed at the moment to materialize that wealth, those benefits for the common folk. The moment in which, the Major Taylor Greene says, you have a problem with the medical assurance. And that problem is a real problem. It's a problem that will make Leo Zagami no longer able to pay for his medical assurance if it passes like it is, the situation, and many others like me who don't have a lot of money, who are able to pay now with the subsidiaries their medical assurance. But that might not be the case tomorrow. Well, in that case, I'm profoundly disappointed because it was supposed to be about America first. You cannot simply state that we are doing this because there's a bunch of illegals who are on those subsidiaries or are taking medical benefits without being. Of course, I don't want that. Then just go after the illegals. Go after the illegals. Get Tom Homan to actually work in symbiosis with Kennedy and go after the illegals and take them away from the medical subsidiaries, benefits, and anything else because we can't afford it.
They don't get the same health care benefits that we layman people do, because I get fired up when it comes to this health bullshit, because anything related to health, just everything, because I'm tired of these rich fucks living to 100 years old while us normal people live to 70, 80 years old, and if we're lucky, 80, if we're lucky. And usually years before you already have many problems, ailments, and all that. I'm just sick and tired of it, man. It's
you see, if then the reaction to all this becomes Zoran Mandani and communism, then that is like we are trading one evil for another evil that might even be worse. So it's like politics doesn't have the answers anymore.
No, you're 100% on point with that.
And in my books, I explained for many years, there is an elite. That elite is ruled on top by Sabbatian, Frankist, and Jesuits, and then below you have all these secret societies, these think tanks, these clubs of privileged people. And like Michael Jackson said, they don't care about us.
No, man, they don't. But you're labeled all Leo or or Mike, you're too black pilled. I don't think you're black pilled enough.
No.
I don't. You know what I mean? How about I'm more what's red and blue? It's more purple. I don't know. But anyways, we're about to round.
Listen, I mean, in this book, I also make a point when it comes down to Israel, because a lot of people critique the very existence of Israel. And I was actually disappointed just when it was yesterday. There was somebody who interviewed me who then had, for the first part of the show, a guy who was actually condoning Hamas or Hezbollah and all those people. And I'm like, I'm not for that kind of stuff. I have condemned all of this stuff in volume 10 of my confessions, as you know, and I have been condemned.
That's the one, that one right there. That was the last one you came on.
Yes, that we discussed in the past.
Yes.
But the thing is, every single organized religion is corrupt. Every single organized political party is corrupt. We are in front of mediocrity on a large scale, ignorance on a large scale, which is piloted on top by people who know very well that keeping the majority of the population ignorant is great. So nobody wants these people to read this book. Nobody wants people to read this other book, or anybody wants people to read this other book that demonstrates that the Jesuits are in charge of the educational system, who are the ones who were on the forefront when they were actually fighting ISIS in Los Angeles. Do I support in any way, shape, or form that side of the democratic policies? Absolutely not. But when it comes down to the medical thing, that is really something that we need to discuss with complete and utter honesty. And at the moment, of course, we have a government shutdown. But I mean, I know that means also a lot of suffering for a lot of people who are not getting their paycheck. But at the same time, I mean, what are we going to do? Are we going to simply pass this bill and then in a few months, we're not going to, there will be 5 or 6 million people without a medical insurance? Because, I mean, I'm not going to be able to pay $12,000 a year. I'm not going to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So it's I love America. I even gave up my Italian citizenship, which meant free healthcare. And I did it because I believe that this country has still a lot to offer and that the American dream can be kept alive. But it is becoming increasingly difficult to really respect these people and their promises that are becoming obviously more and more inconsistent with time. So it is about, I think, maybe changing the whole political establishment in a way that you don't need any more millions to, become a candidate. I was a candidate in Italy for parliament. You know how much I spent for my whole political run?
How much is that?
Maybe $3,000.
It didn't get you very far, did it?
No, but I was on the ballot, but I was like, at the end, I lost, of course.
People like that should be able to win here, though.
No, but the difference is that here you can't even get on the ballot with $3,000.
I know.
You need at least 30 million.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So it gives you an idea. Then the fact that it was rigged, and then, they told me, okay, maybe you can try again. I said, okay, I'm not interested, I just give one chance. I just did it for seeing how politics operated from the inside, what it means to be a political candidate, what it means going out campaigning. It was an experience. And I'm very grateful for that experience.
So we're about to end the discussion for this time. Can wait to get you back on, but I had this because you've brought up the New York City mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani. So I saw this post on X. I don't know if this is true, but this one guy said breaking newly leaked documents reveal that New York City mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani plans to terminate all city contracts with companies tied to Israel and pull city funds from banks that finance the Jewish state.
Okay. Zoran Mamdani can promise the moon, can promise the stars, can promise whatever he wants. But in the end of the day, even when it comes down to certain funding that he wants to do, he will not be able to do it without the approval of the state or federal approval. And it seems like that is more about propaganda. And then to actually see Zoran Mandani being promoted by, like I explained in my latest articles, go and check them out on leozagami.com. He was supported by progressive rabbis, women rabbis, transgender rabbis. He was supported by part of the Hasidic community. And people are, how comes they are supporting him? Well, read my book and you will understand why these people have all been infiltrated and why basically, the Sabbatian Frankists, let's not forget, the Sabbatians became outwards Muslims, and they created a lot of powerful links. It was because of the domain, was because of the Sabbatian and then the Sabbatian Frankists that the lodges of Freemasonry brought down the Ottoman Empire, but then they brought up all the various realities that we see today in the Middle East. And they have connection with all the various sects of Sufis, of secret societies within the Muslim world. So the Shia Muslims that we see, the Shia Muslims, they are anti-Zionist, anti-Jew, Guys, Shia Islam was founded by a Jew called Saba. So what are we talking about here? It's just like people are led astray by their ignorance. So I think that clarity and bringing clarity is my objective. And so I'm glad that today I was capable with you to have a very interesting conversation that I think will be appreciated by a lot of people.
Leo, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's always a treat and honor and privilege, man. Thank you.
Thank you.